Do you still feel like you don't quite sound Portuguese enough when you speak? Well, mastering the pronunciation of closed vowels could be the game changer that you've been searching for. If you caught my recent video on how to hear those hidden syllables in Portuguese, you already know how crucial closed vowels are in sounding authentic in Portuguese. Mispronouncing them might just be giving you away as a foreigner. So by the end of this video, you will master how to make the closed E and the closed A sounds, which sound very, very similar. But if you can get them right, it will elevate your Portuguese conversation to a whole new level. I'm Liz, and I've helped hundreds of English speakers just like you go from feeling insecure about their pronunciation to confidently engaging in conversations. With just a few tweaks to your accent, you can transform your speaking skills. Like my student Sean did, for instance. He recently had an amazing experience at the pharmacy where he greeted the pharmacist, requested what he needed, and even engaged in a friendly back and forth about bandage sizes, all in Portuguese. By the end of their chat, the pharmacist was so impressed with Sean's pronunciation that she encouraged him to keep up the good work. And this is what happens when you can nail down pronunciation fundamentals like closed vowels. People are going to understand you clearly and you can earn compliments instead of having to switch to English. If you haven't got it yet, my free pronunciation guide that covers 7 of the most challenging sounds in Portuguese is a great place to start improving your accent. You can click on the link in the description below to download it and start getting compliments on your Portuguese. So let's dive in. This video is a follow-up to my previous video on the #1 mistake stopping you from understanding spoken Portuguese. So if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend checking it out next, because understanding closed vowels is essential to improving your overall comprehension of Portuguese as well as pronunciation. Today, we're looking at 2 closed vowels that sound very similar, and my students ask me time and time again, what is the difference between the two and how do we make the 2 sounds? So the sounds in question are the closed E, or sometimes called the mute E, which sounds like this. The international phonetic alphabet symbol to represent this sound is this. Now, the easiest way to get to this sound is to compare it with the other E sounds in Portuguese. So here they are. We have open E, my mouth is at its most open. Middle E, my mouth is closed down a little bit more. And then the closed E that we're talking about today, which is So our mouth is literally going to close down as we go from open to mid to closed E. Now, the closed E sound is often tricky for English speakers because it doesn't actually exist in English. We don't have it in Spanish either. And in Brazilian Portuguese, they often replace it with an E sound, which is represented by this symbol in the IPA. So that's why we're finding it so hard to master. It literally doesn't exist in our native language. So compare how different these sound. The word likewise in Portuguese is igualmente. There's that closed E at the end. But in Spanish, it would be igualmente. And in Brazilian Portuguese, it would be igualmente. So you can see why people are tempted to put an or an E at the end of these words that end in an E in Portuguese. But if we remember our stress rules from this video and remember that stress goes on the penultimate syllable, we know that it's falling on the men in this word, which is why the E is more open and the ending is unstressed. So therefore in Portuguese, it has to be the closed E. So to practice, I want you to think of the closed E as like half a syllable. So when you say it, focus on making it short and crisp. The way I describe it to my students is to imagine it as almost disappearing. You could even practice making the sound by pretending you've just seen something gross. By the way, the word igualmente is one of the one-word wonders that I cover in my free lesson for beginners, where I cover fundamentals of pronunciation, understanding real-life Portuguese, and essential grammar. The link is in the description to sign up. If you're finding this helpful, you will love that lesson. So let's practice. Can you say this word? Let's break it down. So the first thing we want to decide is, in this word, where does the stress fall? Well, as I mentioned, it's going to fall on the penultimate syllable, prioridade. So if I'm very conscious to put the stress on the da, that means that the d at the end is going to be unstressed and reduced. So it's not prioridade, it's prioridade. So think of that final d as almost disappearing like a half syllable. So let's get into the closed A. The closed A sounds like this. and the symbol is this. Now, this sound is a little bit easier since it's similar to the A in the word away in English. So we do actually use this sound in English, so it's much easier for us to find. So think of the A in the English word away. We don't say away, that would make it an open A. Ah, I open my mouth much more when I'm making an open A. Ah. Instead, we say away. It's the same as the A in about, around, or at the end of sofa, banana. So let's practice these words. It will appear on screen and then I will tell you if you are correct. Here's the first word. Conte. The second word. Porta. The final word. Escola. So let me give you a perfect example of why this matters for daily life. Take the word desculpa, which means excuse me or sorry. If you're being polite and formal, you need to end it with the closed E sound, desculpa. But if you're being informal with friends, you end it with the closed A, desculpa. Now, being polite is incredibly important in Portuguese culture, so if you get this wrong, you might accidentally sound rude or overly familiar with someone that you have just met. So it seems like a tiny change, but it's these little details that will make you seem way more advanced than you are and actually convince people to continue conversing with you in Portuguese instead of switching to English. Now, let me share a secret weapon with you. Someone recently commented on one of my YouTube videos about a brilliant way to practice these sounds. In the very famous Portuguese song Grândola Vila Morena by Zeca Afonso, he actually uses both the closed E and the closed A over and over again. So this song is perfect for practicing because in the first two verses, you can hear the closed A in words like morena and ordena, and you can compare that to the closed E at the end of words like cidade and fraternidade. Let's take a listen and you can then try singing along when you have mastered these two sounds.
Grândola Vila Morena, terra da fraternidade, o povo é quem mais ordena, dentro de ti a cidade.
Remember, it's these little nuances that can make a big difference in how Portuguese speakers perceive your proficiency. So mastering these sounds will not only improve your accent, but also help in understanding spoken Portuguese better as well. Because when you understand closed vowels, suddenly all that swallowed Portuguese that I talked about in my previous video starts to make sense. You realize that Portuguese speakers aren't just speaking fast, they're systematically reducing unstressed syllables to closed vowels. This is why you can study Portuguese for months and still struggle to understand natives. It's not just about the speed, it's about those sound changes that no one teaches you in traditional courses. When you master the closed vowels, two things happen. First, you start to better understand native speakers because you're hearing those reduced sounds for what they are. And second, you start to sound dramatically more Portuguese when you speak. So hopefully Portuguese people will stop switching to English with you because you sound like someone who really knows the language. If you want to master not just these closed vowels, but all the fundamentals you need to start having confident conversations in Portuguese, I've created a free 60-minute lesson for beginners that covers everything you need to know. It's linked in the description below and I would love to see you there. I'll be back next week with more tips and tutorials to improve your confidence and conversation skills in Portuguese, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a thing. Ciao for now.